Hello. How are you all doing?
Good.
Good. Excellent. So, I want to talk about love, I want to talk about sex, I want to talk about death, I want to talk about penguins. I think we've heard some really interesting thoughts about the idea of a century. I've heard some great stuff about a new advertising model, emotion, momentum, action. And I think I'm going to draw on a couple of those things myself and pillage them. I think the way I want to do it is I want to start off by looking at a slightly different angle, really. And the angle I want to take, or the angle I did take yesterday as I was sitting down, as I thought, what makes influential ideas? Let's start from a work, just work that's touched me, work that means something to me. So I want to start off with a music video, actually, for a band called Justice by Romain Gavras, which I just think is an amazing bit of work, really. So I quite like that. It's got another couple of minutes, and I'll tease you with what happens in those minutes, but it's pretty extraordinary. I mean, for me, that tells me a lot about what makes great ideas, what makes influential ideas, what creativity is about. Because great ideas for me have emotional triggers that go off like bombs. They could be stories, they could be music, they could be language, they could be colours, they could be gestures. It could be all of those with those other three-dimensional ideas we were talking about. And I think that's true of a top technology, that sensory appeal. I think it's true of amazing UX, like Tinder, just for the synthesis and the purity of the way that works. I think it's true of sort of amazing speeches. And I think it's true of ideas too. So we've got a Marmite campaign out alongside the Penguin. But the words that are used are kind of interesting. The brief started off about forgetting Marmite. But we flipped the word and turned forget into neglect. And suddenly that gets a whole load more interesting, doesn't it? And we've kind of had a pretty good year, Adam and Eve DDB, I guess. We've won Grand Prix at Cannes, and we won the Grand Prix at IPA Effectiveness Awards. I think we're the first agency ever to do that. But which is all of that's great. But I think the thing that most made me happy this year was this, when I walked out of my tube station. And someone had replaced reindeers with penguins. What? That surely is the mark of an idea that's kind of captured some kind of public imagination, that has some kind of influence, for lack of a better way of putting it. So that for me, and the fact that they're making a good margin at 35 quid. So it's commercial and it's creative and it's influential. Box ticked, boom. So I want to talk a little bit about why that's important, because I think it is important. I love creativity, but I love commercial creativity a whole load more. And I think the brutal fact of the matter, if you believe in TGI at all, is that there are stats that sort of show that people aren't enjoying ads as much as the programs as much as they used to. And that just kind of, I know you can pick holes in this kind of this particular bit of data, but I do think there's something going on here, and I want to understand it a little bit more deeply, because otherwise we're going to be extinct as a business. We'll just be talking to ourselves. And I think one of the things that has sort of happened over sort of a generation, really, is that basically we just got a bit distracted. We love fetishizing the new. But in fetishizing the new, especially in the digital age, I think what we ended up sort of fetishizing the niche. And the problem with a niche is that if you're in a commercial business, that doesn't help your clients all that much. So we kind of got sort of trapped in an endless cycle of tactical initiatives, of tweets and microsites this and blogs that and all the rest of it. And all of that's fine and it has a role, but I think it misses a more fundamental thing, which is the fundamentals. And the fundamentals are about brains and people and the emotions and how we feel. Sometimes how we think, but a whole lot more about how we feel. And fortunately, we kind of got lucky. There's a bloke called Daniel Kahneman. He's been teaching us a lot with all of his work around neuroscience and behavioural psychology about why we do what we do and how we do it. Les Binet and Peter Fields and the IPA Databank, an incredible resource. Similarly, Byron Sharp. All of these guys have, I think, basically in different ways helped us refocus on what makes us tick. What it means to be human, why we do what we do, why we feel what we feel. Because we're hardwired for emotion, and it's catnip for the brain. And I think that's ever so valuable in really boring but quite fundamental things, like understanding what is the difference between a product and a brand. They're 100% different. But too often we end up trying to advertise for product. Well, what we need to be doing is building the brand. And unlocking the brand is where you get the transformative commercial value for your clients. The brand is an emotional thing. The product isn't, not in the same way. And my sense is that we're a generation that's in danger, that's kind of forgotten the power, the transformative power of brand equity and the importance of old-fashioned communications, and as well as modern communications, in delivering that equity through every touch point, right through an organisation. And if we can do that, I think we're much better placed to understand the fundamental distinction between the idea and the execution of the idea. And again, those are very different things. And they lead to very different kinds of commercial advantages long term. So I want to touch on three things. I want to touch on intensity as that being why that's the key to fame. I'm going to talk about instinct and the role of finding an insight, and I'm going to talk about planners as entrepreneurs. That means you, I hope. So let's start with intensity. Ooh, sexy build. Not. So just one chart from many of Les Binet's fantastic work with Peter Field. In essence, this says a lot. It says that you need fame to survive. Okay? For your clients, they need fame. Fame means scale. It doesn't mean famous in Shoreditch or Hoxton. It means famous enough that your mum knows it, your grandparents know it, your mates know it, that people out there, what media people call reach, has scale, it has traction, and it has momentum too. But of course, fame's an end, not a means. So one of the things I think that is our guiding principle at Adam and Eve DDB, it's a very intuitive thing. We don't do PowerPoint charts or any of that sort of stuff. We don't have a different kind of creative brief, but I think it's an instinctive thing. But what we do when we're at our best is we seek emotional energy in a problem. Because we believe, I think deep down, that it's that emotional energy is the source of creating competitiveness for a brand. And if you can harness it in the right direction, it is a silver bullet for answering your problem. It doesn't just mean advertising, but sometimes it does. Now, the problem is it means I'm not talking about brand onions or brand pyramids or any of that malarkey. I'm talking about love, relationships, sex, death, violence, betrayal, jealousy, that sort of stuff. Because I think that that's the sort of stuff that makes up our universal condition. It's the stuff you see in films. It's the stuff that brings people to movies and gets them to buy books, to go to galleries, that makes them watch EastEnders week in, week out. And I guess for me, soap operas are a very close cousin to advertising, actually, in terms of what we need to do and what ideas need to do. But the idea is basically the drama in our lives goes deeper than most brand benefit ladders. And it's the stuff that connects with us instinctively It's not about thinking. It's not about thinking. It's not about writing down the words. It's not. It's about what touches us, what makes us give a shit. And this isn't just bollocks, really. Because, I mean, all the stuff that much smarter people than me, like Brother Daniel Kahneman, have been showing is that when people are touched emotionally, it makes our brains biased, and it makes them biased to creating positive meaning and significance to stuff, even if there isn't significance. But our brains are made that way. We can't help it. They're plastic. That's how we influence people. And that becomes a divining rod that biases our behaviours too, but to get brands more often, to get new people to start buying brands, and for everyone to pay more for them, the stuff that makes up profitability, right? So I think there was a really unique insight into this on Friday. What happened on Friday night? Apart from getting out of my lash, what else happened? Come on, someone must have been doing something on Friday night. Come on. Gogglebox happened on Friday night. Yes, that goldmine of cultural anthropology, Gogglebox. I think what's interesting about it is that it's a fascinating window into normal people for those people that don't do 200 focus groups a year, which I guess is probably not too many of us. And it's a window into the hopes and the fears and the feelings and the dreams of normal people. So, and specifically, what happened on this Friday's Gogglebox? Sainsbury's ad, yeah, so.
Oh, I'm getting goosebumps.
Do you think this really happened?
Did.
Really?
Why, aye.
I'm political! I'm political!
Jim? Jim! No, don't do it!
Halt! Er ist nicht bewaffnet!
What did he say?
You have no weapon. Stop, you have no weapon.
You can see the fear.
Yeah, he's terrified.
My name is Jim. My name is Otto. Pleased to meet you, Otto.
That's it. Not a private, I'm not a corporal. I'm just Jim and Otto.
Young German boys, young English boys.
They probably didn't know why they were fighting.
No.
Yesterday, I was thinking, if I was going to die, how would I like to die?
Yeah.
And I was thinking, playing football like I did when I was 14, with our Blazers as goalposts.
Oh, really?
Just like they're doing.
Oh, no wonder you're finding
That's
it so
how I'd like-
upsetting.
That's how I'd like to
Oh, no.
die.
Oh, no. Oh, no, don't.
It is.
No, don't. That's so sad.
Danke. Happy Christmas. Frohe Weihnachten.
He gave him his chocolate, bless him. Look at that.
It's very poignant, isn't it? You know,
But it actually
this time of the
happened.
year, yeah.
And it went on for another 4 years.
So there we go. A bit of Gogglebox. I just think sort of, I mean, an amazing cast of characters, but beyond that, I mean, it genuinely touched them. I started crying when I watched this stuff, and it sort of, whatever you think of a Sainsbury's piece of communication, I've certainly got certain issues with it. But I think one of the things it does do really well is it creates that emotional intensity and that emotional reaction, and that's what it's setting out. One of the things it's trying to do, I guess, and I guess doing so successfully. And it's important. This stuff matters because actually it builds over time commercially. It's like a snowball effect. So, all good. So, we've talked about intensity, why it's important. Let's talk a bit about instinct, because you're a bunch of planners. So, sort of, where do you, emotional energy, what's that mean? How do you direct it? My belief is that it's about gut. It's about gut instinct. That you need to go with your gut, and that there's, if you were to construct such a thing as a periodic table of human emotion, that's probably where the secret sauce lies, really. And the best planners I've ever seen tend to be creatives, actually, but even the best planners who aren't creatives sort of tend to have a good radar for this sort of stuff. Because they're kind of sent in sort of either socially dysfunctional, or if they're not, just inherently quite sensitive creatures. They've got good antennae. So that's tip 1, is be empathetic. And if you have to think about being empathetic, you're probably not very empathetic. I think maybe a more practical tip is this, which is to ask the wrong questions, which is just sort of, I've always found it useful to have a guiding antennae to help provoke in moments where emotion fails me. So stuff like, and I don't want to give you all the secret sauce because we want to keep this stuff in Adam and Eve GDB, obviously. But no, I mean, this is just my personal crib. I use it, and there's a much longer list, but it's stuff like what's wrong with a category, what would we never do, what's wrong with our brand, etc. Just flipping stuff, rather, because normally we ask about all the good stuff, right? But actually, what you want to find is the tension. Talk a lot about big data, big everything, big ideas. But actually the power is really in the small, the intuitive, the unspoken, the non-verbal. So I always find it quite useful to have a bit of a human dashboard, and these are my 2 favourite people in the whole world, pretty much, when it comes to the human dashboard side of things. One is my father-in-law, Terence. He's retired, and the other is Breeder, my ex-childminder, who lives in a council flat in Stotwell. And these 2 people know more about advertising than all of you lot put together, I would hazard a guess, because they're good at sort of decoding it. Certainly a lot better than me at advertising. So if I've ever got a problem, so I ended up doing some stuff on Mulberry, for example. I know not a lot about women's handbags. Breeder helped me out. Breeder cuts to the chase. So use Breeder, your own version of Breeder and Terence as your secret weapons. So that's fine. Go with your gut, find some instinctive stuff. That's all nice. What about, I think the critical bit is how do you apply this stuff? So here's a super simple model. Your silver bullet, I think, is find a deep emotional energy that's going to catapult your brand forward. Find a deep emotional energy that's going to sort of, you can bake into the heart of whatever your execution is. You could even call it content if you want to be cool. And then find the most emotional place to allow it to spread and to flow. And I guess at Adam and DDB, that's kind of, again, it's quite an unspoken thing, but I think when we're at our best, we tend to try and do this stuff. So examples of stuff that is what I mean by brand stuff. I think it's about our collective responsibility as strategists is to think about, is to be ambitious for brands. So to have transcendental kind of thoughts that help unlock emotion. So when it was good, and Tesco wasn't a bastard, Every Little Helps was a genuinely truthful thought about that repositioned that business from being no, but it did back in the late 80s, early 90s. That was a transformative thought for that piece of business. Or more practically, just be emotionally competitive. So, Axe certainly used to be about helping blokes get ahead in the mating game. John Lewis is home of a more thoughtful giving, at Christmas time at least. I mean, that's quite an interesting thought. It's not home of giving, it's more home of more thoughtful giving. It positions a brand in a different sort of space. Touched on this thing. I think the fun theory from Volkswagen sort of had an interesting kind of take on what a brand purpose could be. So the idea of making responsible behaviour fun. It's kind of just quite an interesting starting space for a brand to play in. But you don't always get the chance to do stuff for brands. So let's just talk about some executions because it's a bit easier to talk about. Marmite. I think everyone knows, love it and hate it, and it's been going on for a long time in different guises as a campaign. I think the twist that we put on it was finding something that there was a bit of a tension in the idea that this was a thing that was loved but it was kind of neglected. It was in the back of cupboards. So that's an interesting executional space for to start playing in if your media is telly, for example, and or beyond for that matter. It just felt like it could release a new wave of energy for that brand. For Mulberry, it was very much an execution thing, and our start point really was around, okay, so we want to make this Mulberry the quintessential British handbag again, and actually there's something interesting, isn't there, about present gifting and the role of that quintessential bag at Christmas time and what that really means. So we kind of came up with an idea of present giving as a competitive sport. And that sort of turned into this execution.
Wow. Did you do that?
Yeah, it took me ages.
Look. Thank you. Merry Christmas, darling. Thank you, Mum. Oh. And he waves.
You ready for this? Wave. It's a unicorn.
Thank you. Thank you, Grandma. Shut up! Oh my God! Yes! Yes! Thank you! I love it! I love it! Look at it! Look at it! This is the best present ever!
So it hasn't had any media spend behind it at all. But it's been out for about a week and a half now. It's got a million, just under a million on YouTube, which isn't bad. But I mean, it started off as a very simple thought, which is present giving is a competitive sport, and then the creatives, sort of did that with it, which isn't bad. I mean, that's shot very cheaply. On Volkswagen, it does films ident sponsorship, and we thought that it was just an interesting tension between the idea of making this brand that's making all of this technology into its cars. And so it's all done for real life, but then we're communicating in a movie theatre. So that's kind of how can you have fun with that? And it was just made for real life, not for movies. It ended up. Hello, how you all doing?
Good.
Good, excellent. So I want to talk about love. I want to talk about sex. I want to talk about death. I want to talk about penguins. I think we've heard some really interesting thoughts about the idea of a century of a century. I've heard some great stuff about a new advertising model, emotion, momentum, action. And I think I'm going to draw on a couple of those things myself and pillage them. But I think the way I want to do it is I want to start off by looking at a slightly different angle, really. And the angle I want to take, or the angle I did take yesterday as I was sitting down, as I thought, what makes influential ideas? Let's start from a work. Just work that's touched me, work that means something to me. So I want to start off with a music video, actually, for a band called Justice by Romain. And I think that sort of in that instinct needs to run really deep into the creative process, because it's all about the casting, the pauses, the non-verbal, isn't it? The music. The gestalt of the thing in psychologist terms. But it's also about how you take that into the production values. I mean, that's a hell of a production, right? Hell of a production. Look at the way the sun is shot. It's beautiful. That for me is purity, pure creativity, where you've got the essence of the idea so sharp and the way you deliver it. That is, for me, just as an iconic image. It almost moves me to tears. I mean, it's incredible. And so John Lewis, to some extent, I mean, as well, from a Christmas point of view, like we're already writing next year's Christmas stuff. We're spending 12, it's been happening for years. It takes us 12 months to come up with something that simple. I know it's just about silly penguins, but it's not about silly penguins at all. It's about all the stuff that goes around it. How do you get something as simple as it can possibly be? And it's a culture of constant experimentation. It takes us 12 months to find the right track, the right flavour, the right feel, the right casting, the right director. It's not something done quickly. So everything communicates. And finally, I just want to briefly touch on the platform thing. I mean, I think Harvey Nichols is a pretty strong example. We had a really strong insight around selfishness and rewarding yourself. But the way it played out, is taking it to the next level, is by creating products that sort of really symbolise that idea. And that really, using that as your PR, essentially, I thought was very smart. I won't talk about that. I mean, John Lewis, we've used Gogglebox as for this year's X Factor, really, as being the one, the most hyper-social moment where people will discuss what's going on. And Sainsbury's seems to have done that as well. But I mean, the idea of watching people watching what you will watch, very postmodern, isn't it? But it kind of is very deliberate, and similarly taking that in store. A really cute little thought. So this is about just between an execution and an idea. So if you're a kid, you can bring your teddy bear or your penguin or whatever in store, and he gets animated and it does a breakdance thing. And it's just a nice little small thought, but taking that idea and doing something with it. So to wrap up, stop me waffling on any longer. I think what have I learned? I've learned, I guess, at Adam and Eve DDB, that it's all about simplicity. It can never be too simple. You can never be instinctive enough. It's all about the instinct. I think it really helps, even if it is quite a classical model, but it really helps to have a thread of steel in terms of that emotional energy that runs from your brand into the execution and into kind of the flow of an idea. But most of all, I think it's really about this. I think if I had to sum it up in one word, it's around creating intensity. So this is what happens at the end of the Justice video. Much.